scope that remote sensing gives for studying what it says there, environmental impacts in the terrestrial environment. I'm going to focus particularly in the Russian north, partly because that's where a lot of my research has been, and partly because that's where most of the interesting, shall we say, environmental impacts actually happen. Being kind of categorical about this, the sorts of industrial activities that interfere with the terrestrial environment in the north generally can pretty much be divided up into these three categories. Smelting activities, that's mostly smelting of ores for things like nickel and copper, which are usually sulfur-rich ores, which is environmentally very problematic. Mining and things related with mining, and things to do with energy, extraction of hydrocarbons, and then conversion, burning and stuff. So as I said, I'm just going to look at the terrestrial impacts. We'll start with smelting of sulfur metals, because this is the big one. This is the largest local source. I'm not speaking of transboundary or long-range effects here, but locally generated impacts from acidifying emissions in the Arctic. This is mostly where it comes from. And because, as I said, these are ores of things like nickel and that group of metals. They're heavy metals, so there's quite a bit of that around as well. So what tends to be associated with these acidifying emissions is heavy metal contamination as well, and that's not good news. It's a big source of sort of local to regional environmental damage for lots of reasons. It's acidifying. There's basically sulfuric acid being dumped into the environment, so you get acidification of soil and water, the pH goes down, it's not generally good. Loss of soil fertility, loss of nutrients in plants, drying out of plant tissue. If you hit plant tissue with atmospheric sulfur dioxide, the sulfur dioxide is a molecule that would really like to be sulfuric acid, and it needs a water molecule to do that, so it sucks it out of wherever it can get. That's plant tissue, then it dries out the plant tissue, so you get a lot of desiccation. And in an area that's prone to wildfire, that can make wildfire much more likely to happen. So increased fire incidence is a problem as well. And in extreme cases, this can just deny large amounts of food and habitat. And there are some extreme cases around. And in fact, in the Arctic as a whole, there are many thousands of square kilometres that are affected this way. Does this map work? Yes, it does. Okay, you can't...
There's a pointer right in front
of
it.
There's a pointer right here. Laser pointer. So the figures are out of date. These actually probably are about 15 years old, and generally speaking, this kind of activity has decreased somewhat in the Arctic. So the actual numbers are probably a little bit on the big side, but what they are is sulfur emissions in thousands of tons per year from Arctic smelters. And you can see there's a cluster of them here in the European part of northern Russia. There are essentially three. And then there's a really big one here, the biggest, the most polluted place in the Arctic by a long way, Norilsk. So it's all in Russia. And Norilsk, in fact, is such a big problem that it alone contributes more than 1% of the global anthropogenic sulfur emissions just from this horrible place in the Arctic. And you can see that here. Again, this is like old data, but this is actually from the AMAP report. This is a map of sulfur dioxide emissions in the northern part of the northern hemisphere. And you can see largely it maps onto where it's industrialised, which is what we expect. But you also see this little cluster around here, which is coming from the Kuril Peninsula, and you see that spot there, which is Norilsk. And this is also from the AMAP report, a map of modelled sulfur dioxide deposition. And largely it maps to this, but again we see, actually rather more significantly, what's happening on the Kuril and this rather large affected region around the Rills. So it's industry in the south, if we're speaking from a relative perspective, plus what is locally produced. And what it does is not so good. This is the second largest of these places. This is the nickel smelter. It's also on the Peninsula in European Russia. There it is, smoking away, very bad for you. And what it does, as I said, it causes increased plant stress, it causes an increase in the forest fires. This is an area probably 20 maybe kilometres south, 15, 20 kilometres south of the smelter that I was just showing you. You can see a lot of burned trees here. The tundra vegetation is also not resilient to this if it's done in the street. This is some almost stripped bare tundra vegetation, and close enough to the smelter, the destruction is total. There is, well actually, it's not quite true to say there isn't a living thing here. There is a little bit of birch scrub here. That's actually a sign of an ecosystem in serious crisis. There won't be anything there. Indeed, of course, the soil structure itself has actually been destroyed. The organic content of the soil is gone. The acidity is so high. The Norilsk is the even worse place. This is, again, it's nickel, but also copper and cobalt smelting. Cleverly, actually the same thing is true in Montreux. Cleverly, the industrial complex is kind of integrated into the city. So people have to live with this, which is not great. The infrastructure is old, and of course it's a permafrost environment, so it's actually quite difficult to build infrastructure on, so things tend to fall over from time to time. That doesn't help either. And the quantities are vast. The quantities of pollutants that are emitted are vast. And, well, we reckon that around the Rills probably 250 million trees have been killed. So it's a regional problem rather than a local one. In passing, it isn't just the natural environment that's been damaged in doing this, of course. This is part of the Gulag system, or it was part of the Gulag system. So this whole business was actually constructed at huge human cost. Very nasty. So, what about remote sensing? Well, probably this is quite a well-known fact, but remote sensing